Ever think about what's going on under the surface?
Yeah.
Like literally inside you, keeping everything running. I mean, we talk about the immune system, but there's a whole other network in there. It's kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah, it is. The body's got this whole hidden system working overtime, and most people, they don't even know it's there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what we're looking at today, the lymphatic system. You sent over your study guide, and wow, lots to unpack. So we're going on a deep dive here. We're going to break down the major functions, map out the key parts, figure out how it all works. By the end, you'll be a lymphatic system whiz, guaranteed.
Absolutely. We're going to use your guide to hit all the highlights and maybe, just maybe, uncover some surprising stuff along the way. You ready?
Born ready. Let's do it. Your guide starts with the main functions, 3 of them. Where do we begin?
Well, first up, fluid recovery. We've got to think about how blood is always moving, right? And as it flows, some fluid leaks out from those tiny blood vessels. It ends up in the tissues. And we call this interstitial fluid.
Okay, so we've got some leakage. What does the lymphatic system do about it?
Think of it like a super efficient drainage network. It scoops up all that extra fluid and takes it back to the bloodstream. Without this, well, we'd be walking around looking like balloons, swollen tissues everywhere. It's like, I don't know, a built-in flood prevention system at the cellular level.
So it's not just containing the leaks, it's actually reclaiming that fluid.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. What's next on the list?
Number 2, immunity. Now, you might not think of drains and immune systems in the same sentence, but hold on. The lymphatic system, this thing is a major hub for fighting off those nasty infections.
Really? How so?
It houses and transports these white blood cells. They're called lymphocytes, like T cells and B cells.
Yeah.
Big players in the immune response.
Right. The immune system's heavy hitters.
Exactly. And the lymphatic system, it's like their highway system. It lets them patrol the body, keep an eye out for trouble.
So a drainage system that doubles as an immune surveillance highway. Talk about multitasking. Okay, so we've got fluid recovery, immune defense. What's the third big job?
Lipid transport. Now, this one might surprise you. So in the small intestine, there are these special lymphatic vessels called lacteals. And these guys, they can absorb fats and also those fat-soluble vitamins, D, E, A, K, straight from what you eat.
Interesting. So where does it go from there?
It gets packed into this special lymph, we call it chyle, and it travels through the lymphatic system. And eventually it'll join up with the blood, but it takes a little scenic route first.
So it's not just about keeping us from getting puffy and fighting germs.
Yeah.
It's also how we get fuel from fats and vitamins.
Yeah.
Man, the more we learn about this system, the more awesome it gets. Okay, so 3 core functions down. Let's look at the hardware, the anatomy that makes this all happen.
Got it. So first, let's talk about the fluid itself, because it changes depending on where it is. Starts as plasma, right, the liquid part of our blood. Then when it leaks out into the tissues, it becomes interstitial fluid. And once it enters those tiny lymphatic capillaries, it's officially lymph.
Okay, so it's all the same stuff, just rebranded as it moves along. So we've got the fluid, the lymph. Now, how does it travel?
Picture this. A massive network of tubes. They spread throughout your entire body, almost every tissue. That's your lymphatic vasculature.
Sounds extensive.
It is. But here's the thing. It doesn't have a pump like the heart to push things along. Lymph moves passively, more like the blood flow in our veins. It relies on some other clever mechanisms, but we'll get to those later.
No central pump. That's interesting. How does it keep moving in the right direction then?
Valves. Just like veins have valves, so do lymphatic vessels. These valves are one way, so the lymph flows forward and doesn't back up. It's pretty ingenious.
Valves are definitely crucial. So we've got the fluid moving through these vessels. What other components make up the system?
The cellular players. The lymphoid cells. These are the immune system's front line, working within the lymphatic system. We've got lymphocytes, and of course that includes our famous T cells and B cells. Each type has its own special role, targeting different threats.
Like a specialized defense force.
Exactly. And then there are macrophages. These guys are like the cleanup crew. They gobble up pathogens, debris, anything that doesn't belong.
Pac-Man in the lymphatic system. Love it.
Right. Then we have dendritic cells. They're also capturing invaders, but they're more like intelligence officers. They take bits of those invaders and show them to other immune cells so they know what to target.
And finally,
reticular cells. They're the architects. They build the support structures within the lymphoid tissues so everything stays organized.
okay, so we've got fluid moving through a network of vessels with a whole army of immune cells patrolling and keeping things clean. Let's go back to the vessels. specifically those lymphatic capillaries, the entry points.
Right. They're like the starting point for the whole system,
Uh,
these tiny tubes, and they're blind-ended, meaning they have one closed end, unlike blood capillaries, which are continuous loops.
Blind-ended. That's a bit odd, isn't it?
It is. And they're found in loose connective tissue pretty much everywhere. Well, almost everywhere. They're actually absent in a few spots, like bones, bone marrow, teeth, and most of the central nervous system.
Huh. So there are a few places the lymph doesn't go. Interesting. And you said they're highly permeable, so fluid can get in easily. What makes them that way?
It's all about their structure. First, they've got these little flap-like mini valves. Think of them like swinging doors. When the pressure outside is higher, the doors swing in, letting fluid, even larger molecules, enter. But when the pressure inside is higher, boom, the door's shut, nothing leaks back out.
Okay, I can picture that. And what else?
Anchoring filaments. These are tiny protein fibers attached to the cells that make up the capillary walls. They kind of act like tethers, keeping the capillaries open, especially when there's a lot of fluid pressure.
So the very thing that necessitates fluid recovery, the pressure,
Yeah.
actually helps the process along. It's like a self-regulating system. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And the lacteals you mentioned in the small intestine, are those just specialized capillaries?
Exactly. Lacteals are just lymphatic capillaries, but they hang out in the villi of the small intestine, those little finger-like projections, their job. They suck up those digested fats and fat-soluble vitamins, making that milky chyle.
And that chyle bypasses the liver.
For now, yeah. It eventually goes to the liver, but first it takes a trip through the lymphatics.
So it's a detour, a scenic route for fat absorption.
Hmm.
Cool. Okay, capillaries are the starting line. Where does the lymph go from there?
It flows into bigger vessels called collecting lymphatic vessels. Think of them like the next step up.
And what are these vessels like?
They're actually similar to veins structurally. They've got the same 3 layers, but the walls are thinner and they have even more valves than veins do.
More valves, why is that?
Because the pressure is lower in the lymphatic system. Those extra valves make sure things keep moving in the right direction. And these vessels, they like to branch out and connect with each other a lot. They form these networks, we call them anastomoses. They often run alongside veins and arteries too, like they're hitching a ride.
Sharing the road with the circulatory system. Smart. And you mentioned lymph nodes before. Those are found along these vessels, right?
Absolutely. Lymph nodes, they're like checkpoints along the lymphatic highway. Very important for filtering. We'll dig into those in a bit.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But first, what comes after these collecting vessels?
They merge into even larger vessels, the lymphatic trunks. These are the major lymphatic highways, you could say.
Major highways. So there are a few main ones.
Yep. We've got the paired lumbar trunks. They handle the lower body, legs, pelvis. Then there are the paired jugular trunks for the head and neck. Paired bronchomediastinal trunks drain the chest. And paired subclavian trunks take care of the upper limbs and chest wall.
Wow, that's a lot of trunks.
Oh, and we can't forget the intestinal trunk. That one's a solo act, handling the abdominal organs. So each of these trunks is collecting lymph from a specific region.
Okay, so that's how the lymph gets organized from different parts of the body. But where does it all end up?
The final destination. 2 main lymphatic ducts. They're up in the base of your neck, and they connect back to the veins, returning the lymph to the bloodstream.
Back to the circulatory system, full circle.
Exactly. So there's the right lymphatic duct, the smaller of the 2. It handles the right arm, right side of the head and chest. It empties into the veins right there on the right side.
That's the other one.
The thoracic duct. Now, this one's the big kahuna. It drains lymph from basically the rest of the body. It starts down in the abdomen in this sac called the cisterna chyli. Then it travels up through the chest and empties on the left side back into those veins.
2 major ducts, returning all that filtered fluid to the blood. You also mentioned lymphatic filariasis earlier as a consequence of things going wrong. Can you expand on that?
Sure. It's a pretty serious condition. You might know it as elephantiasis. And the culprit, tiny parasitic worms. They're spread through mosquito bites, and they love to hang out in the lymphatic vessels.
Oh, sounds like trouble.
It is. Over time, they can block the flow of lymph, and that causes fluid to build up, usually in the legs or genitals. It can lead to massive swelling, and the skin can thicken and harden.
It's like the system gets backed up with nowhere for the fluid to go.
Right. It's a really stark reminder of how important this system is and what can happen when it's not working properly.
Yeah, definitely makes you appreciate it. But we still haven't addressed how the lymph moves without a pump. What keeps it flowing?
That's a good question. It's a team effort, really. It relies on several things. Our muscles play a big role. Every time we move, our muscles squeeze those lymphatic vessels. And because of those one-way valves, it pushes the lymph forward.
So movement is key.
Absolutely. And breathing, too, especially those deep breaths. It creates pressure changes in the chest, and that helps to move lymph along, especially in the thoracic area.
Okay, so movement, breathing, what else?
Even the pulsing of nearby arteries. It can gently push on the lymphatic vessels, contributing to the flow.
So even our heartbeat is lending a hand.
Flowing.
Amazing.
And the walls of the bigger lymphatic vessels, they actually have smooth muscle that can contract. It's not super strong, but it helps. And of course, we can't forget those valves. They make sure everything keeps moving in the right direction, towards the heart.
So it's like a whole body effort, a symphony of movement and pressure keeping the lymph flowing. Okay, let's shift gears and go back to those lymphoid cells, the immune system's special forces within this network.
Right. We were talking about lymphocytes. They're the stars of our adaptive immunity, that very specific, targeted response to threats. And there are two main types, T cells and B cells.
Right. We touched on them briefly before.
Yep. T cells are all about cell-mediated immunity. They're the hands-on fighters. Some T cells are like the generals. They coordinate the whole immune response. Others, the cytotoxic T cells, they're the soldiers on the front line, seeking and destroying infected or cancerous cells.
And the B cells?
They're the antibody specialists. They handle what we call antibody-mediated immunity. So when a B cell bumps into an antigen, something it recognizes as foreign, it gets activated.
Like a virus or bacteria.
Exactly. And then that activated B cell transforms into a plasma cell. And plasma cells, they're antibody factories. They churn out tons of these Y-shaped proteins that can latch on to specific antigens.
Like a lock and key.
Perfect analogy. Those antibodies can neutralize the invader, mark it for destruction by other immune cells, or even block it from getting into our cells in the first place.
So T cells are the direct contact fighters and strategists, and B cells are the long-range weapon specialists.
What about macrophages and dendritic cells? They're the ones doing the cellular eating, right?
Yep, they're the phagocytes. Macrophages are the big eaters. They develop from monocytes, which circulate in the blood, and then they move into the tissues.
And once they're there.
They gobble up anything that shouldn't be there. Pathogens, dead cells, debris, you name it, they eat it.
So they keep things tidy.
They do, but they're not just garbage collectors. They're also antigen-presenting cells.
Yeah.
After they eat a pathogen, they take bits of it, those antigens, and display them on their surface.
Why do they do that? It's like showing a wanted poster to the immune system. Those displayed antigens can activate T cells, triggering a more targeted immune response.
So they're like the town criers, alerting everyone to the threat.
Exactly. And then we have dendritic cells. They're also phagocytes, and they're pros at antigen presentation. They can activate both T and B cells, linking the innate and adaptive immune responses. They're especially important in those lymphoid follicles we talked about, those centers of B cell activity.
So macrophages and dendritic cells are both eating and informing. What a combo. And lastly, we have the reticular cells, the structural support team.
Exactly. They're the builders. They produce these reticular fibers which form the stroma, the scaffolding of lymphoid tissues. It's like the framework that holds everything together, gives the immune cells a place to live and interact.
So they're the ones making sure the lymphoid cities are well built.
Exactly. Without them, everything would be chaos.
Okay, we've covered the fluid, the vessels, and the amazing array of immune cells. Now let's talk about where all the action happens, the lymphoid tissues and organs. You mentioned a distinction between tissues and organs, right?
Yep. The main difference is encapsulation. Lymphoid tissues, they're smaller, more spread out, and they lack a distinct capsule, a sort of protective covering.
Okay, so they're more loosely organized.
Right, and you find them scattered throughout the body, especially in those mucous membranes lining the digestive, respiratory, and other tracts.
Those areas that are exposed to the outside world.
Exactly. That's why this widespread tissue is called MALT, mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue. It's a first line of defense right where we need it, and its main job. Housing lymphocytes and providing a place for immune surveillance.
Like security checkpoints at all the entry points.
Yeah.
Makes sense. And then there are different ways these lymphoid tissues are organized.
Yep. You've got diffuse lymphoid tissue, which is just loosely scattered cells and fibers. It's found in most organs, especially as part of MALT.
And the other type?
Lymphoid follicles, or nodules. These are more tightly packed spherical clusters of lymphocytes. They're like little immune command centers. And often they have a lighter central area called the germinal center. That's where B cells are multiplying, turning into those antibody factories, the plasma cells.
So that's where the B-cell action is happening.
It is. You'll find these follicles in bigger lymphoid organs, like lymph nodes in the spleen, but also in clusters in places like Peyer's patches in the intestine, the appendix, the tonsils.
Okay, so follicles are the organized hotspots of B-cell activity, and diffuse tissue is the more widespread immune presence. Now, what about those encapsulated lymphoid organs?
Those are the big guns, the lymph nodes, the spleen, the thymus. They're where lymphocytes really get down to business, encountering antigens, getting activated, and multiplying.
So they're like the major immune bases.
Exactly, and they're categorized as primary or secondary. The primary lymphoid organs are the bone marrow and the thymus. That's where lymphocytes are born and trained.
Like boot camp for immune cells.
Exactly. B cells mature in the bone marrow, while T cells start there but finish their training in the thymus.
So the thymus is the T-cell academy.
Right. And then there are the secondary lymphoid organs. Those are where the mature lymphocytes, but still naive, encounter antigens for the first time. This is where they get their first taste of real action and launch a full-blown immune response.
So it's like going from training exercises to the battlefield.
Perfect analogy. Those secondary lymphoid organs are the lymph nodes, the spleen, tonsils, Peyer's patches, appendix, and MALT.
Okay, that primary and secondary distinction really clarifies their roles. So let's dive deeper into some of those secondary organs, starting with the lymph nodes. They seem crucial for filtering.
They are. They're the only lymphoid organs that actually filter lymph. Each lymph node is this little bean-shaped organ about the size of a small marble, and we've got about 600 of them.
Wow, that's a lot.
Right. And they're strategically placed all over, in your groin, armpits, neck, along those major vessels in the chest and abdomen.
So like security checkpoints along all the major routes.
Exactly. And they're designed for filtering. Each node has a capsule around it, and then these extensions called trabeculae divide it into compartments. The outer part is the cortex, and that's where you find those B-cell follicles we talked about. And deeper in the cortex, you've got T cells and dendritic cells hanging out.
And what about the inner part?
That's the medulla. It has these medullary cords, which are clusters of B and T cells, and medullary sinuses, which are spaces filled with lymph and macrophages.
So lymph enters the node, what happens then?
It flows through those sinuses slowly, giving those macrophages plenty of time to do their job. And then it exits through fewer vessels, which slows things down even more.
Yeah.
It's all about maximizing filtration and immune surveillance.
So it's like a maze designed to trap anything suspicious. What exactly are those nodes filtering out?
The macrophages are grabbing debris, pathogens, cellular waste, even cancerous cells that might be trying to spread. And at the same time, those dendritic cells are presenting antigens to the T cells, kicking off an immune response.
So it's filtering and activating all at once.
Exactly. And if you've ever had swollen lymph nodes, those tender bumps, that's a sign they're working overtime fighting an infection.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that. So they're a good indicator of what's going on. What about the spleen? It's another big lymphoid organ, right?
It's the biggest. It's up in the left upper abdomen, tucked under the diaphragm. And it's doing double duty. It's an immune organ and a blood filter.
Blood filter. How so?
The spleen has white pulp, which is full of lymphocytes, B and T cells, and they're on patrol, watching for bloodborne pathogens. And then there's the red pulp, which is all about filtering the blood.
What's it filtering out?
Old or damaged red blood cells, platelets, any debris. It also stores iron and platelets and monocytes, those precursors to macrophages. And in fetuses, it even helps make red blood cells.
So the spleen is like a multi-purpose cleaning and storage facility.
Exactly. And structurally, it also has a capsule and trabeculae, like the lymph nodes. And the splenic artery and vein, those big blood vessels, they enter and exit at the hilum.
Okay, so the spleen is the blood purifier and immune watchdog. Now, what about the thymus? You mentioned it changes a lot throughout life.
It does. The thymus is all about T-cell maturation. It's most active when we're kids, helping to build that initial immune army. After puberty, it starts to shrink.
Like it's retiring after a job well done.
Right. It gets replaced by fatty tissue, but it still keeps working, just not as intensely. It's located in the mediastinum between the lungs, and it has 2 lobes.
And what's going on inside?
The outer cortex is packed with immature T cells, learning the ropes. And the inner medulla has fewer T cells and these unique structures called thymic corpuscles. They're thought to help develop regulatory T cells, which are kind of like the immune system's peacekeepers, preventing things from getting out of hand.
So the thymus is like a specialized training ground for T cells.
It is, and unlike other lymphoid organs, it doesn't have B cells or those follicles. And its support structure, the stroma, is made of epithelial cells, not reticular fibers.
Huh. So it's unique in several ways.
It is. And it also has this blood-thymus barrier, which protects those developing T cells from being exposed to antigens too early. They need to learn in a controlled environment before they're ready for the real world.
Okay, so the thymus is like a T-cell boot camp with high security. Now, what about the tonsils? Those are usually the first things we think of when we have a sore throat.
Right, they're always on the front line. The tonsils are a ring of lymphoid tissue around the entrance to the pharynx, that passageway for air and food.
So strategically positioned to catch anything coming in?
Exactly. And unlike those other organs, tonsils aren't fully encapsulated. There are several types. Palatine tonsils, the ones at the back of your mouth, lingual tonsils at the base of the tongue, pharyngeal tonsil, also known as the adenoids, and tubal tonsils around the openings of your eustachian tubes.
Wow, so many tonsils.
And they all work together to trap pathogens in these little pockets called crypts. It's like they're setting traps for those invaders.
Smart. And then what happens?
Once those pathogens are trapped, they come face to face with the immune cells, triggering an immune response. It's like an early warning system, a first taste of what's out there.
So they're like the border patrol, always on the lookout.
Exactly. And finally, we have Peyer's patches and the appendix, those lymphoid structures in the digestive tract.
Right, we often forget about those.
We do. Peyer's patches are clusters of those B-cell follicles, and they hang out in the ileema, the last part of the small intestine, the appendix. It's that little finger-like projection off the large intestine.
And what are they doing down there?
Defending us from the hordes of bacteria in our gut. They destroy bacteria before they can cause trouble and generate memory lymphocytes, those long-term protectors. The appendix is thought to be a safe house for good bacteria, too.
So they're keeping the gut ecosystem in check.
Exactly. It's a tough job down there.
Well, we've certainly taken a comprehensive tour of the lymphatic system. From the fluid itself to those tiny capillaries, the larger vessels, the specialized immune cells, and those amazing lymphoid organs, each playing its part.
We have. And it all works together so seamlessly, keeping our bodies healthy and balanced.
So, Isabella, to sum it all up, we explored the lymphatic system's key roles. Fluid balance, acting as a drainage system. Immunity, providing a network for immune surveillance and response. And lipid transport, that special pathway for absorbing fats and fat-soluble vitamins.
We covered it all.
We did. We mapped out the anatomy, from those blind-ended capillaries to the collecting vessels, the major trunks, and those two main ducts that return lymph to the bloodstream. And we got to know those key players, the T cells, B cells, macrophages, dendritic cells, reticular cells.
And hopefully you now have a clearer picture of how all those pieces fit together. It's a fascinating system, really.
It truly is. So, Isabella, after learning all this, it makes you wonder, considering how involved the lymphatic system is in everything from fluid balance to immunity to nutrient absorption, what other subtle ways might this network be impacting our overall health? It's definitely something worth thinking about.
Absolutely. It's an area of ongoing research, and there's still so much to learn.
Well, on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive for today. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep those lymphatic fluids flowing.
See you next time.